So let me just welcome everyone to a new perspective in hearing health technology. I am Adam Shulberg, Senior Audiologist and Managing Director at Quebec Audiology. I'd also like to introduce Alison again. Alison is an Audiological Scientist and has been the National Training Manager at Oticon in the UK for the last 13 years and also works very closely with the team in Denmark. And we are very excited to be hosting two sessions today, and we'll be exploring the latest advances in brain hearing technology and specifically Oticon MORE. We've allowed 45 minutes this afternoon to explore this, and we will examine the benefits it can bring to your daily life and also take a look at some validation studies. We hope that there will be some time for questions later, but there is a lot to get through and a relatively short amount of time. At any point, you may click on the speech bubble, which is at the top of the screen, and ask a question or comment, and we'll try to get to this, but if we can't, we'll reply after the session closes. At Quebec, we talk a lot about the effort of communication and how reduced hearing impacts. If you think of speech and other sounds as data or information, then reduced hearing results in missing data or words and sounds. We tend to focus on speech, and today we have technology that is able to manage speech very, very effectively. But we live in a world that is filled with complexity, and speech is not the only sound source. There's often interfering or competing noise, which can make it very difficult to follow conversations, as I'm sure you all know. It has become a strategy for many manufacturers to minimize or remove interference. But as Alison will discuss, this also impacts heavily on our natural soundscape. Do we really want to remove sounds that are enjoyable, enriching, and often important, and will ensure that we can fully participate and engage in the world around us? Not least, this is also what the brain expects. Sorry, Brenda, would you mind switching off your camera? Thank you very much. Not least, this is also what the brain expects and needs, rather than manipulate a signal that reduces or excludes everything else. Alison will discuss with you the way that Oticon MORE technology delivers speech and other sounds to the brain in a way that is helpful, enjoyable, and appropriate, and significantly reduces the effort of listening. Effort of listening is key, as it is this that will cause us to avoid, reduce participation, or switch off. The effort of listening when there is interference can also be exhausting, and sometimes the only option is to switch off. But switching off, withdrawing, avoiding situations are all, of course, very effective coping strategies, but they are also extremely unhealthy, and they're a major influencer in cognitive decline and dementia. And life and communication is not just about speech and conversation. Yes, this is key and a major motivator to improving our hearing, but pleasure, enrichment, enjoyment also come from other sounds, which are equally important and will help to maintain good cognitive function. At Quebec, we embrace a bottom-up and top-down approach. Bottom-up is ear to brain, and top-down is considering some of the brain's cognitive functions, assessing these using clinically proven tools, and strengthening them with hearing technology and training. Our consultation and discovery sessions at Quebec will include tests that examine and explore things like working memory, executive function, and consider the speed at which the brain processes information and the effort, so that we can ensure that you're fully supported, bottom up and top down. And where we feel that working memory, for example, can be strengthened, we can deliver and coach specific tailored training programs. Working memory is in fact a critical component to communication, as this is a key skill that is needed to fill in the gaps in conversations that the ears are missing. Also filling in the gaps that are compromised or sounds and words. Oticon MORE delivers sound appropriately which helps to support cognitive function and reduces the effort of communication, increases engagement and enables full participation, and strengthens neural function, and has also been shown to reduce the impact of cognitive decline. The technology you'll hear about today recognizes and complements our approach at Cubex. So welcome to Oticon MORE and a new perspective in hearing health technology.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. It's fantastic to see you all today. I'm going to share some presentation slides with you. So in a moment, you'll see a presentation appear on your screen. There we go. I think it's fair to say that we have seen some very exciting developments in hearing technology in recent years, and what I have to show you today represents a whole new level of improvements for your hearing. Our agenda for the next 25 minutes or so is as such. I'd like to start with the concept that we hear with our brains rather than our ears. The important job of interpreting sound information happens in the brain, and the way that sound is delivered via the ears needs to support these processes. That will lead us to explore the new approach to processing sound in Oticon MORE. And after delving into the technical aspects of the technology, we will look at the benefits you can expect for your own listening experience. And finally, we'll look at the research studies that validate the benefits of this new approach to sound processing. Let's begin with our first theme. It's well documented that hearing is a complex cognitive process. Research dating back decades proves that we hear with the brain, and that a hearing loss not only means a loss of sensitivity to sound, it also comes with challenges in understanding speech, particularly in noisy situations. Hearing loss impacts the quality of the sound information that the brain has to work with, and the brain does adapt to this lower quality of information. However, that does also require extra effort from the listener. If left untreated, hearing loss can lead to other health problems. There's a growing body of evidence that links hearing loss to cognitive decline and even depression and dementia. The mechanisms of how these factors interact are still not fully understood, but more research is being done all the time. A really interesting article was published in July of last year in The Lancet, which, as you know, is one of the highest ranking medical journals in the world. And in this paper, they published a consolidation of all the existing evidence on dementia, dementia management, and dementia prevention. And the authors identified that about 60% of the risk factors are non-modifiable, but 40% of the risk is attributed to potentially modifiable factors. In other words, something that the individual could do something about. They incorporated all the potentially modifiable risk factors from different phases of the lifespan, and the authors then proposed a life course model of dementia risk. And this is a simplified version of their analysis that you see on the screen. In midlife, hearing loss is the #1 greatest modifiable risk factor for developing dementia. Even at mild levels, hearing loss is documented to increase the long-term risk of cognitive decline. And we should also note that the risk of dementia increases with worsening hearing loss. The important message here is that treating hearing loss is an important step to keeping your brain fit and to helping protect against related health problems. So, treating hearing loss as early as possible is key. But what is the best way to provide augmented sound to the brain? To understand what the brain needs, let's take a closer look at the path of sound from the ear to the brain. Sounds from a person's auditory environment flow into the ear, and once inside the inner part of the ear, they are converted into a neural code of information, which is transported to the brain via the nerves. Thanks to new research, we now know that the auditory cortex, which is the part of the brain that processes sound, consists of two subsystems that work together on the neural code. The first subsystem we'll call Orient. It scans the full sound environment and creates a foreground and background. The second subsystem, which we'll call Focus, allows us to focus on a sound of interest. Based on all the sounds detected by the Orient subsystem, the Focus subsystem can choose to listen to a particular sound, such as a conversation partner, or to switch attention to another sound when needed. The basis for understanding sound effectively is a well-functioning partnership where the Orient and Focus subsystems work together continuously and simultaneously. Now I'd like to examine how hearing solutions affect this pathway. Conventional hearing technology has a very focused approach. Technologies like traditional directionality reduce access to all the sounds except for one talker. And this approach certainly does have many benefits, certainly to accessing a particular sound of interest, but it can also end up restricting people's access to the full sound scene. This limiting approach suppresses the natural sound input and delivers a poorer neural code to the brain. Not only does this cut people off from their surroundings, it goes against the brain's natural way of working. And a poorer neural code makes it harder for the Orient subsystem to work properly, which then negatively impacts the Focus subsystem. So to better support the brain, we need a new approach to technology. Hearing technology needs to work with the brain and support natural sound processing. This is the core of Oticon's philosophy. To help people with hearing loss, hearing solutions must deliver a good neural code that is easy for the brain to decipher. And this brings us to our next theme, where we explore how the new technology in Oticon MORE works to better support the brain. The new Oticon MORE is the first hearing device ever that gives the brain access to all the relevant sounds in a sound scene, the full perspective. A technological breakthrough that gives you access to not only speech, but all the relevant sounds. The goal is to give you access to all meaningful sound objects in the sound scene in a precise and well-balanced way. With this information, the brain is then able to focus quickly on what is most important, while still being able to access and handle other meaningful sounds. The aim is to create a world where perceiving sound uses less of the brain's resources, so you can enjoy the full sound scene and dive into a specific aspect of the sound scene when desired. Delivering the full sound scene requires a whole new approach to sound processing in hearing devices. Until now, the sound processing systems have been designed using theoretical models and man-made hypotheses of how best to enhance speech and reduce background noise. Oticon MORE is different. To revolutionize the sound processing technology in Oticon MORE, developers went out into the real world with a special 360-degree spherical microphone to collect sounds from real-life situations. This special microphone is built from 32 advanced individual microphones that are evenly distributed across the sphere. The output from each microphone is combined to capture a given sound scene with detail and accuracy. All that sound information is then taken and used to train a deep neural network. Now, what in the world is that? Neural networks are a special type of artificial intelligence. They're a specific class of algorithms under the more general discipline of machine learning, and they are already used successfully in other fields, for example, facial recognition. All those real-life recorded sounds, and there are 12 million of them, are used to train the deep neural network to recognize all types of sounds, their details, and how they should ideally sound, all in order to optimally support the brain. Let's take a closer look at how a deep neural network works and how it processes sound with more accuracy and precision than other hearing systems. In general terms, a deep neural network consists of different layers with thousands of connections. Input is received at the input nodes and flows through the network. Each layer feeds information in one direction, from input to output. Then the really clever bit about deep neural networks is when one of these is being trained to do a task, it receives feedback about any output that it produces incorrectly, and this information then flows backward through the network. All the connections that support incorrect answers gradually get weaker, and the connections that support correct outputs become stronger. How then does the deep neural network in Oticon MORE work to handle a sound scene like this in real life? Processing sounds is complex, especially in a complex listening situation like this. Sounds are mixed together, coming and going, and some sounds are even constantly moving. The deep neural network inside Oticon MORE is inspired by how our brain is trained to recognize and prioritize sounds. This way, it can learn to recognize different types of sounds and their relative importance. The training is done such that it can recognize and prioritize the right sounds with great accuracy. But it's also not trained too much such that it can't generalize to any type of listening situation in real life. The neural network doesn't actually see a sound scene. It only receives a complicated mixture of sounds. The first layer extracts simple sound elements and patterns from the input. Then the next layer builds these elements together to recognize and make sense of what's happening. Finally, based on all of this, the output layer chooses how to balance the sound scene. This is then compared to how it should ideally sound. At first, the neural network has no idea what it's listening to, so it just responds randomly. But every time it balances the sound scene the wrong way, information flows back through the network and says, no, the balancing is wrong. So anything that was supporting that decision, that connection becomes weaker. In this example, the seagull is oversized, which is not ideal, and this is fed back into the system. And anything that was supporting a more ideal balancing, its connection strengthens. So the deep neural network tweaks the individual connections between each neuron to better suppress the seagull next time. This process is then iterated for all the sound scenes, and as a result, the neural network starts to identify the features of each object to better distinguish between them. It does this repeatedly until 12 million sound scenes later, the deep neural network teaches itself to process any environment presented to it. It's able to emphasize meaningful and suppress non-meaningful sound objects, and improves as the training goes on. The deep neural network inside Oticon MORE is deployed in a processing feature that we call more sound intelligence, and you may see this term referred to in Oticon's literature. It starts by scanning and analyzing the sound scene. Your full sound scene, moment by moment, is scanned 500 times every second, resulting in a precise analysis of all the sounds and the complexity of the surroundings. It then applies your personal listening preferences to establish a clear target for how to handle all varying sound scenes. Then, processing and contrast enhancement take place. Once the sound scene is analyzed, more sound intelligence precisely organizes the sounds around you, and then utilizes the deep neural network's vast training to create contrast between the identified sounds. The result is a more natural representation of all sounds in a clear, complete, and balanced sound scene. All this technology seems very exciting. Certainly it seems exciting to me. I hope it does to you too. But what exactly does this mean for you in your day-to-day life? How could it improve your daily listening experiences? I think we can all agree there's not much that is normal about our current situation, but under the normal circumstances we hope to get back to in the coming months, this is the type of experience we'll all be enjoying once again. In a scene like this, there are many sounds. Some of them are very important, such as the voices of your conversation partners. Others are not quite so important, but are still relevant as they give context to the situation. Others yet provide very little useful information and just get in the way of hearing the other sounds that you want to hear. Traditionally, hearing devices would prioritize speech over everything else, and often just one source of speech at that. This approach makes it easier to listen to one conversation partner at a time, but it would make it challenging to engage with the rest of your sound environment. With Oticon MORE, all sounds of importance are placed in the foreground, including all the sources of speech and other sounds of relative importance. Everything else, so that which is truly noise, is pushed into the background. So very simply, Oticon MORE enables you to hear all the conversation and keeps you connected with your sound environment. Because your brain is being presented with clearer, more complete sound information, it's easier to focus on the talker you want to listen to, even when multiple people are speaking and whether the listening environment is simple or complex. If your brain is doing its task of processing sound more easily and with less effort, it stands to reason that there will be more resources in the brain left over for remembering what is being said, responding to conversation, and engaging in social activities. During the development of Oticon MORE, a number of people with hearing loss were invited to take part in a special dinner event at Oticon HQ in Denmark. I'd like to show you a short film of the event in which a few of the participants share their experiences. I should mention this event happened pre-COVID. Also, some of the participants speak in Danish. The film itself contains subtitles, and if you're using the captions in Microsoft Teams, you may want to turn those off for the duration of the film, as they don't deal with Danish very well.
Challenging listening environments are where the hearing aids are really put to the test. So in order to see how Oticon MORE handles these situations, we invited a number of test participants in for an extraordinary dinner event, which was nothing like anything we've done before. 16 guests with hearing loss were welcomed into our Oticon headquarters for an evening with a very different and creative hearing experiment. First, they took off their own hearing aids and were fitted with test hearing aids. Next, the guests entered our experimental restaurant and enjoyed a meal while we changed the sound scene around them. With a specialized loudspeaker setup, we played an array of nature sounds, from quiet rain to rolling thunder, and from a deep forest to a peaceful beach. At other times, we transformed our restaurant into an outdoor sidewalk cafe with traffic noise, other people speaking, and the sounds of plates and cutlery. We also threw in some jazz and modern pop music to give our guests a broad variation of sound, all while enjoying their meal and conversing with other people at the table. Why did we do this? Well, when developing new hearing aid technology, it's crucial to really test a hearing aid's ability to handle challenging listening environments and a wide variation of sound scenes and sound sources. Oticon MORE is developed to do just that. Where traditional technologies handle these types of complex environments by focusing on speech coming from the front alone and closing down all other sounds, Oticon MORE is the world's first hearing aid developed to give access to all relevant sounds, not only speech, all to support the way the brain naturally handles these environments. So how did our test participants react when we really put Oticon MORE to the test?
These are definitely better, with a better high-frequency response, with the better changing focus from one conversation to latching on to a conversation at the other end of the table, and also better clarity in understanding speech.
Det var ikke generende at få de forskellige lyde ind, og jeg bemærkede ikke hele tiden lydene. Men hvis jeg lyttede efter dem, så var det jo meget klarere.
In my old hearing aids, I switched between 2 or 3 programs, but these hearing aids seem to be able to do it all in one program.
Jeg fik mere med end før. Altså, jeg kan ikke vide mere fra det hele med, for det, jeg har høreapparater, ikke så? Hvor meget jeg får med, det ved jeg ikke, men jeg fik mere med end det, dem jeg selv har. Det var en meget positiv oplevelse, og det var, det var bedre.
Jeg havde en fornemmelse af, at jeg kunne høre det, der var omkring mig. Det var meget behageligt. Og jeg havde ikke den der med, at jeg ligesom skulle dreje ørerne eller hovedet for at lytte med.
Jeg synes, at lydkvaliteten i de her høreapparater er enormt god.
Jeg vil da helst ikke aflevere dem.
From the valuable feedback we received from the participants, we're happy to conclude that Oticon MORE passed the test. The development of hearing aids should be a user-driven process, and we at Oticon continuously use all the valuable inputs from our testing to further fine-tune our technology. All so we can optimize the listening experience for hearing aid users where it really matters, in their everyday lives.
I hope you found this information journey today interesting. Our final theme is the research studies that validate the benefits we expect the Oticon MORE hearing solution to deliver. The new research I'm about to show you continues an extensive series of research studies documenting listener benefits. These are some of the findings from studies conducted over the last 4 years in collaboration with our research partners. The evidence shows that not only do people enjoy better access to conversation in noisy environments, but they're also able to follow conversation with less effort and are able to remember spoken information more effectively. In this latest study, test persons were seated in a soundproof room surrounded by speakers. 2 of the speakers in front of the person each played a different person talking. The 4 speakers at the sides and behind the person played noise like you would hear in a restaurant. The task for the test person was to focus their attention on just one of the talkers in front of them and ignore the other talker and all the noise. What the researchers were looking for is how well all the sounds presented through the speakers were then represented in the test person's brain. So how well is each test person's brain processing all that sound information? Well, that sounds crazy, but it is actually possible to measure this with EEGs or electroencephalography. To measure EEGs, the person wears this rather attractive looking cap like you see in the picture here, and it has 64 electrodes placed at strategic places around the head. Then what the researcher sees as those recordings are being made is 64 voltage values over time. So there are 64 recordings that each appear on the screen. All that information is taken together and put together, and then we compare the EEG recordings to the envelope of the acoustic signals. So in other words, we take a look at the original sounds of voices that the test persons were listening to and see how well that sound correlates with the EEG recording. So here are 2 very basic examples to demonstrate what that might look like. The envelope of sound or in other words, the shape of the sound at the top, if we compare that one to the EEG recording, we can see that they are completely uncorrelated. They have very little in common. But the sound envelope at the bottom shares a very high correlation with that EEG recording. So that sound is much better represented in the brain as per this measurement. By doing this test several times and in different conditions, we can get an idea of how well Oticon MORE performs compared to other hearing solutions, and also how well the particular processing feature, More Sound Intelligence, is able to improve that EEG signal compared to when that feature is turned off. Our first result compares Oticon MORE to another current technology, although it is a previous generation, and also at a premium level, called OpenS. The strength of the EEG signal for the initial part of that recording, which represents the Orient subsystem, was 30% improved with Oticon MORE. Now, OpenS is already providing extraordinary benefits and itself has very strong evidence behind it. So to see this incremental improvement is really exciting. Then if we compare a test condition where More Sound Intelligence, so that's the feature that uses the deep neural network, where that is turned off compared to where it's switched on, the EEG signal shows a 60% clearer result, which shows a huge improvement and a huge contribution of that particular signal processing. In another test, we want to examine how well test persons understand speech. So it's great that sounds are represented more accurately in the brain. That means the brain is able to do its job more easily. But we also want to see that there is an improvement to listening to speech in background noise. So in this test, Oticon MORE compared to OpenS had a 15% improvement in the score that we call dBSNR, or decibel signal to noise ratio. In other words, with Oticon MORE, the test persons could cope with 15% more background noise compared to OpenS. And if you're able to hear more of the speech and your brain is processing the sound more easily, that means there are more resources freed up for remembering, responding, and engaging in social situations.